Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's presentation on fabulous flies with the Canadian Wildlife Federation and Jeff Skevington. We're very excited that so many people registered tonight. It's fantastic. So as you are all joining in, it takes a few minutes for everyone to join the room. Perhaps you could say in the chat where you're from. And if you're new to Zoom, just move your mouse around and you'll see a black bar show up. And in the chat, if you can select to everyone, and say where you're from. It is really, really cool to see how we're all across the country and beyond joining. And I am Sarah Colber. I'm with the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Gardening for Wildlife program, and I am actually just west of Ottawa. So welcome. And okay, people are starting to say where they're from. Montreal and Ottawa, Manitoba. Awesome. Ontario, Edmonton, Quebec, great. New Brunswick. Oh, someone has read book, Jeff, and they're enjoying it. That's lovely. BC, super. Okay, listen, please keep doing that. I'm going to go over a bit of housekeeping while you keep signing in. So I've mentioned about, for those of you that are just joining now, I've asked everyone if you're willing to say in the chat where you're from, because it's quite fun. Remember to choose to everyone, not just host and panelist. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A section. And again, if you've just logged on and you didn't hear me say, if you're new to Zoom, hover your mouse around, you'll see the black bar and you'll see a Q&A spot. That's where the questions should go, so that at the very end, they're in one spot and it's easy for me to ask them to Jeff. And anyone wondering, yes, this will be recorded. And in a few days, an email will go out from Zoom with the replay link. It just takes a few days for the video to get rendered and then for me to create the email, and any interesting links that come up from this experience, I will plop them in that email for you. So you'll all have that coming in a few days' time. And so don't feel you have to take a bazillion notes unless you really want to. Okay, so let's see how we're doing here for time. I think I'm going to keep going. Let's see. So as I said, I'm Sarah Colber with CWF's Gardening for Wildlife program. And yeah, I'm so happy you guys are all here tonight. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, and I respect the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples. And as I say with all of these Gardening for Wildlife webinars, it's a lovely tie-in, because here we are trying to be wise stewards of our little corner of the country, this beautiful place. And the First Nations have been doing that for eons, you know, respecting and appreciating Mother Earth in all kinds of ways and all her creatures, and so living in harmony with them. So I think it's wonderful that we're doing this in our own way. And I guess it's time now to introduce our speaker. And for those of you that are just joining, and I see a few more people have logged on, you're welcome to say where you're from in the chat. Say to everyone, please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will check them after at the very end and ask Jeff the questions at the end. So Jeff Skevington, our wonderful speaker tonight. I'm so excited he's actually doing this. A lot of people I know are very excited that Jeff agreed to do this. He's a fantastic speaker. Jeff did his Master of Science at the University of Guelph and his PhD at the University of Queensland. He then worked for a year for the California Department of Food and Agriculture as an entomologist before moving to Ottawa, where he worked for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada for 20 years as a research scientist. While there, he also worked as an adjunct professor for Carleton University, Trent University, and University of Guelph. His research focused on the taxonomy and phylogenetics of flower flies and big-headed flies. The former are pollinators that are as important to us as native bees, but are relatively poorly studied. Jeff retired from this position in the late 2023 and started working part-time as an ornithologist expedition guide to Antarctica with Intrepid and Viking. He's still working on scientific papers in his free time and has written over 130 peer-reviewed papers and more than 100 additional papers. He has a couple of books, including the popular Field Guide to the Flower Flies of Northeastern North America. And I'll have a link for that as well in the follow-up email that will come out to you all. Jeff is also heavily involved in the natural history community as a volunteer and is currently president of the Ontario Field Ornithologists and sits on committees for various organizations. And as I mentioned earlier, from personal experience, I can say Jeff is very highly respected, and we're all very, very thrilled that Jeff has agreed to give this talk. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, mute myself, and hand this over to Jeff.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the introduction. Hi, everybody. So lots of names that I know here, which is awesome. I'm so happy to see so many people out to hear about flies. So let's get this set up here, see how we do. How's that look, Sarah?
That looks perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So I am going to go through a talk tonight. I'm going to go through and introduce you to some of the families of flies. I know we've got people with all expertise levels here, and so I'm going to give you sort of a quick introduction to a bunch of common families of flies, so you get an idea of the breadth and diversity out there. And then I'm going to go through some of the ecological roles that they play. And then I'll finish up focusing on some of my research area, which is flower flies mostly. But anyway, so I've been a naturalist since I was a little kid, and I started my love of insects very, very early, probably age 5 or 6, and got into birding probably a little later, around age 8, and have meshed the two into my lifestyle ever since. And so I really love flies and insects in general. I'm going to try to impress upon you tonight some of the diversity in this group. So they're wonderfully diverse morphologically. These are all flies that I'm showing you tonight. Unless I tell you otherwise, all these pictures are flies. And that itself will come as a surprise to many of you, because a lot of these things are bee mimics or wasp mimics and would be just dismissed in the field, like this one in the top right. People would just assume that's a bee quite often, but these are flies. And I'll tell you how to recognize them as we go through the talk tonight. We'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, not just recognizing the diversity and the beauty of these animals, but also the incredible ecological diversity. And I want everyone to think a little bit differently maybe about flies after tonight, because they're amazing animals, and just about everything that you can think of with these flies is fantastic. So I just thought I'd pick this simple example here to get you introduced to it. You're all familiar with these galls that you see on goldenrod. So goldenrod gall fly lives inside of that. The larva winters inside that gall. They come out in the early spring. In the top left picture, here's an adult, what they look like. But inside the gall is a fly larva. And just think about that. These are above the snow line. They're typically in windswept fields. And how many animals do you know that can live totally exposed above the snow line in the wintertime? Not very many. Most animals have to find warm spots to survive. They might have amazing adaptations, incredible thick fur and whatnot if they're a mammal or whatever, but there are not many things that can live totally exposed to the cold and wind. These are freeze-tolerant animals, and so parts of their body will freeze, but the critical parts don't. And so they have chemicals in their body, glycogen and whatnot, that keeps them from freezing. So even a simple thing like that we've all seen every day, maybe you've never really thought about that, but there are insects that are super coolers that can go down to minus 70 or 80 degrees without freezing at all. Others that are tolerant of freezing and parts of their body can freeze. So lots and lots of neat little things like that maybe we don't think about enough as we're out wandering through the woods or meadows and looking at these things. So what makes a fly a fly? Of course, insects are incredibly diverse, the most diverse animals on the planet. And flies are one of the most diverse groups of insects. It's always an argument. Are there more beetles? Are there more flies? Are there more wasps? Flies are incredibly understudied compared to, say, beetles. So there are currently more species of beetles in the world described than flies, but we know that there are more flies than beetles. So what makes a fly a fly? They have 2 wings as adults. Almost all insects have 4 wings as adults. And you can see here that the hind wings, I've got a red arrow pointing to it, the hind wings are specialized into organs called halteres. Halteres are gyroscopes. So they're incredibly rich in nerves, and they spin these things as they fly, and it tells them about their aspect. Many flies are incredible hoverers, and these halteres are one of the things that allow them to be such amazing flyers. So the hind wings are changed. They're not totally lost. They're changed into these halt hairs. So that's one of the way to tell flies. Adult mouth parts, if you think of a house fly, they're modified for sucking, but they can be tubular. They can be different sorts of types of mouth parts, but basically modified for sucking typically. The larvae lack segmented legs. This is a larva on the bottom left corner of your screen. So those are the things that make a fly. But just think two wings, and that's going to tell you that it's a fly. Of course, some wasps, they pleat their wings, and so it looks like two wings, but it's actually four wings. But they have them sort of pleated and stuck together. So sometimes it's a little tricky to count wings. So just keep that in mind if you're getting up close and personal with a wasp and you're not sure if it's a fly or not. So in terms of diversity, there are 172 families currently recognized of flies, give or take. Everyone has a different take on what's a family and whatnot, but about 172, 69 families of extinct flies. Over 162,000 species of flies have been described. So let that gel a little bit. If you think about birds worldwide, how many birds are there? About 11,000 species. So over 10 times as many species of flies as birds, and they're not nearly as well known as birds. Most birds are described at this point. We're still describing new birds every year, but not at a very fast pace, whereas flies, there's many to be discovered still. Probably well over 1 million species of flies on the planet. So very diverse, both morphologically and in terms of number of species. So what I want to do here is very quickly go through the top groups of flies in terms of diversity. And why did I cut it off at mosquitoes? Because I want everybody to know that there's not one mosquito in the world. There are 3,725 described species of mosquitoes. So there are lots and lots of species in all these groups. So let's have a quick look. Why are there so many crane flies? Part of the reason that there are so many described crane flies, Tepulidae, is because there were people working on this at an incredible rate in terms of describing the diversity of crane flies. So C.P. Alexander was a famous crane fly taxonomist and described many species. And really, he alone is one of the reasons there are so many crane flies known in the world. So these numbers are often not totally reflective of how many species there really are on the planet, because some of them have had more attention than other groups. But crane flies, they look like huge mosquitoes. You'll recognize that one on the bottom looks just like a big mosquito. They don't bite. Larvae are often in soil, feeding on roots of plants and things like that. But they're rather innocuous, other than looking a little bit mosquito-like. Another huge group, the second largest group in terms of diversity of described species, is Tachinidae. But in reality, this group is much larger than crane flies. Certainly at least 10 times this large. Probably there are over 100,000 species of tachinids in the world. And at this point, about 1/10 of the diversity, perhaps, has been described. One of the things you'll find as I talk about different families of flies, these huge groups, is they often have very consistent ecologies. So the tachinids are entirely parasitic, as they all lay their eggs in or on other creatures. Sometimes they'll scatter eggs and the eggs will hatch and the larvae will search out and find the host. But the bottom line is they end up in another animal and they kill it. Usually, caterpillars, stink bugs, you name it. Almost all insects have some tachinids attacking them. So these are parasitoids. They keep everything else in check, and they're incredibly diverse. I assume most people here tonight would recognize at least some robber flies. They're a very charismatic group that many of us really love to watch. They're kind of like the birds of prey of the fly world, if you wish. You'll see them sitting out on the tips of branches and darting out, catching other insects. They'll take anything pretty much their size or smaller. So they're generalist predators typically, although some species are fairly specialized in what they'll chase. But overall, generally, they're fairly specialized. 7,531 species. They're extremely diverse, but they're very well known. They've attracted a lot of attention over the years by taxonomists as well as ecologists. And so compared to other groups, they're fairly well known. Still lots of undescribed species, but nothing like Tachinidae, the bristle flies. These dolichopodids, these long-legged flies, are also predatory, but they're much, much tinier. I'm sure you've seen things that look like the bottom right, these glossy green, tiny little flies running around, darting around on leaves. Long-legged flies are really abundant, both in terms of numbers and diversity, with over 7,000 species. Very, very poorly known in terms of their in terms of the number of species. There's a lot of undescribed long-legged flies still out there to be discovered. But they have some fantastic displays. So you can see on the top right, look at those incredible flags on the legs there to show off to the female. On the bottom left, you can see the big swollen front tarsi that they use for displaying and waving for the females. And some of them have really big genitalia. You'll see, I didn't show this. I know it's a family-friendly atmosphere. Anyways, some of them have huge globular genitalia at the end of the abdomen that they use for display as well. So really, really fantastic flies. You're probably all familiar with midges. People often think these are mosquitoes. I always hear people calling these mosquitoes. They're not. These are non-biting, over 7,000 species in the world, but they form these massive emergences. The larvae are in water, they're aquatic, and often in the spring around the Great Lakes or any waterways, you'll find huge numbers of midges. And often you'll get what look like tornadoes of just males. And when a female flies through, you'll see the whole tornado move and follow her. So it's big clusters of males in mating aggregations. This group is perhaps the most poorly known group of flies on the planet. 6,000 plus species described. These are gall midges, and you'll all recognize their effect on plants, forming different galls, some shaped like little bells, others by outgrowths of the plant, sort of like almost like a cancerous growth of the plant around to form a gall. We don't know how many species there are. There are certainly over 100,000. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 1 million species of gall midges. There's about 250,000 species of plants in the world, vascular plants, and each plant has 3 or 4 species of these gall midges. So they're remarkably diverse. This is the group that I spent most of my career working on, flower flies, also called hover flies by our European friends, and over 6,100 species. They're pretty well known. I think they're very comparable to birds in terms of overall diversity. I think once the dust settles, there will be about the same number of species as there are birds, maybe 10, 11,000 syrphids in the world. So I'll tell you lots more about these later, but they're fantastic pollinators, and we'll go into that when we talk about pollination. There are lots of biting flies, and especially in Canada, we know all about biting flies. Biting midges are also called no-see-ums. I've heard people call them sandflies. I would not recommend it. There's another group that name's used for. Stick to no-see-ums. That's a good name for these. Many of them are very tiny. One of the few flies that causes me great aggravation. I'm immune to most now. I've been outside so many hours in my life that biting flies don't bother me anymore, but these do. I still swell up from them. Extremely diverse though, 5,900 plus species described and many, many more undescribed. Bee flies, for me, they're kind of like robber flies. They're a really, really attractive group of insects, fun to watch. The one on the bottom right there, the greater bee fly, it's flying in parts of Canada right now. It's an early spring species. One of my first signs of spring when I'm out in the forest, the very first few flowers are in flower, and you'll see these greater bee flies hovering, visiting the flowers. You'll see them on coltsfoot, dandelions, and other introduced species this time of year, as well as some of the native plants in the forest. So keep an eye out for those. They're fun to watch when the females are ovipositing. You'll see them go over a nest of a wasp or a bee, and you'll see her bobbing her abdomen. And what she's doing is she's throwing grenades down into the vicinity of the nest, trying to get them down the hole. And so she has a sand chamber in her abdomen, and she mixes sand with the eggs, and she's throwing out eggs and sand in a mixture. And then the larvae are going to actually be parasitic on the bees or wasps. So pretty neat. Very important pollinators, but have a different effect on the things they parasitize as larvae. So that's the one thing you've always got to remember when you're talking about insects, is that often the adult lifestyle and the larval lifestyle is totally different, right? So people who are really into butterfly gardening will put out all kinds of flowers and things for butterflies, but they forget they've got to put out plants to feed the babies as well, right? Because the larvae are herbivores, they're feeding on plants in your garden. So sort of a different thing going on with adults and larvae often. Dance flies are related to long-legged flies, but these are I think of these as tiny robber flies. They have a proboscis like a robber fly. They inject a paralytic enzyme into their prey, which immediately paralyzes their prey, and then a proteolytic enzyme that breaks it down, and then they suck it out that straw. Basically, they're making a soup and drinking it. So pretty fun to watch. You can see in the bottom middle picture there, they have pretty fantastic mating displays as well. These are tiny flies. These are not as big as robber flies. But some of them will provide their partner with food. They'll actually give them a small animal they've killed, a small insect they've killed. Others will take that thing that they've killed and they'll wrap it in a silk ball, so a packaged gift that they'll present to their partner. And still others will make just a silk ball, no food in it, as is the case here, and provide that with to the partner. So all kinds of neat displays and things in this family. Houseflies. How many people here knew that there was more than one housefly in the world? It's a whole family of over 5,000 species. Bottom right is the common housefly, the one that gives insects such a bad name, carries all kinds of diseases, gets into our food and waste and farms and barns and things. Is a real problem. But it's only one species in this family. There's another one that's nasty too, stable fly. Everyone who's been to the beach knows a large fly that bites your ankles. That's stable fly. In our part of the world, they don't carry many diseases, but they're very, very annoying. Whereas many houseflies are innocuous. They have no effect on us directly. Some, like the top right, are predators. They do various things. There are other plant feeders as larvae and things like that. So a very, very diverse group, not all pests. In fact, for every pest species, there's probably hundreds of non-pest species overall in the insect world. But the pests certainly get the limelight. And we will talk about the pests tonight because that's an important part of understanding insects. So horseflies, another group of annoying insects. These are biting flies, over 4,000 species of these. And some of them very large, as you can see by that bottom right photo. The black horsefly is very, very big. But we've got a good variety of these in Canada. The egg mass is shown in the bottom left here. And those eggs, when they hatch, the larvae fall into the water. So they're aquatic as larvae, but the eggs are actually laid out of the water. And I wanted to finish this sort of summary talking about mosquitoes, because so many people assume we're dealing with one species of mosquito, when in fact there are so many. Not all of them bite us, only some of them bite. And they all carry different things. Some of them carry no diseases, others carry multiple diseases. You can see here just sort of an overview of these. Let's see. All of these occur in Canada except for the top left, Sabbathese. I thought I'd throw that one in just because it's such a beautiful mosquito. Anyone's traveled to the tropics and has had a spectacular metallic blue mosquito with big legs, big fuzzy legs like this land on them, that's a Sabbathine mosquito. They're fantastically pretty, but they can carry malaria and other things. So we'll talk a little bit more about mosquitoes and some of the diseases they carry later. So anyways, a little bit about the general reproduction in these flies. So flies are higher insects that have a complete metamorphosis. So they go from egg to larva to pupa to adult, so 4 stages. And as I said, each stage might do different things, right? With larvae feeding in a very different way than the adults. So we need to sort of get a grip of that as we're talking about them. But even though that's the generalization, in a group with 162,000 described species, there's of course going to be lots of exceptions. That's the one beautiful thing about biology that causes physicists so much pain, is that it's very gray. Everything in biology is gray. So you have a rule and then you break the rule. And so, in fact, there are flies that develop their eggs internally and give birth to live young. So some of the flesh flies, for example, do this. Bot flies in the bottom, sorry, not bot flies, louse flies, hippobosids in the bottom right. The bat flies in the middle, and tsetse flies. Tsetse flies are actually really good parents that produce very, very low numbers of offspring, but they have a very bad name because, of course, they carry sleeping sickness in Africa. So not something we have to worry about in Canada. So anyways, kind of neat to know that they don't all follow the same general pattern, but overall, most of them are egg, larva, pupa, adults. So flies have some amazing mating rituals, and we've already started talking about that. We already talked about some of the gift givers. We talked about some of the displaying species. Some of are territorial, just like birds. There are some that glow, some that swarm. We talked about the midges swarming. And I'm going to focus a little bit on hilltopping and a little bit more about some of the remarkable runaway sexual selection that some of the flies have had. So if you've not heard of this term, runaway sexual selections, typically used for birds and things like that are on islands where they don't have many predators. So these this is a group, the birds of paradise, that are found mostly in New Guinea, but also some in Australia and other nearby places. And the females have driven the males over time to selected for incredible traits. So these birds are just phenomenal, with everything from these crazy head plumes through to almost like a dress that the parodia, the top right one, the parodia is put up to display. They go through just incredible displays as well. So this is maladaptive typically. If there were predators in the scene, if there were a lot of predators around, these birds would be taken out. But because it's on an island, not many predators, this sort of thing can be selected for. Well, this happens in insects as well. And I wanted to use this as an example because this is very, very interesting because it's evolved so many times. So there's not just one group of insects that have evolved these crazy stalk eyes, but there are, I think I've got 5 or 6 examples I wanted to show you here. So signal flies, platystomatids, some of them have normal heads, some species, but others have these stalk eyes, with the most magnificent one being the one at the bottom, Achius rothschildi. Has very, very long stalked eyes, and these are used for display. And this is, again, this has been driven by female choice, female selection. A lot of these things are island dwellers, just like the birds of paradise, but not all. Some of the Richardiids are found throughout the New World tropics, and many of them have this same crazy, instead of stalk eyes, they've got entire stalked heads, basically, the heads with the eyes on the tips. But every sort of variation, some spectacular animals in this group as well. A third unrelated family, the picture wing flies, Eulidiids, same sort of thing. So you'd swear these things were related to each other, right? Because they have the same adaptations, but these have come up again and again because of natural selection driving these features. This is one of my favorites, fruit flies, a very unadorned group overall. There's a small group called Phytalmia, the antler flies, that are found in places like New Guinea. Again, New Guinea's a real hotbed of crazy selection. And you can see the antlers on the top right one, and then these gentle protuberances here. The eyes are normal, but the bottom one has the cheeks, the genny, are protruding out for display and pushing each other around for the males. So amazing animals. Probably the best known of these crazy-eyed insects are the stalk-eyed flies, Diopsidae, with many species. Even here in Canada, we have 1 or 2 species. Ours have short stalks. They're not nearly as big as this example here. Most of the truly wondrous ones are tropical, like these. But I wanted to show you a little video because it's quite amazing how they actually get their stalk eye developed. So when they come out of the pupa, this is what they look like. No stalk eye.
He begins by gulping in air bubbles, forcing them up into his head. He then pumps the bubbles into the stalks supporting his eyes, just like blowing up a balloon. And this is what earns these creatures their name, the stalk-eyed fly. A few final adjustments to straighten out any remaining creases, and he's ready for action.
All right, I don't think any talk on natural history should be complete without a little bit of Attenborough. So thanks for that. But amazing that so many families of flies have been driven to these same sort of extremes by female choice. So I wanted to talk about a really remarkable behavior called hilltopping as well. This is another mating thing that's going on, and this is all around us. So this is on hilltops across the country, around the world. In fact, you'll find these in arid regions, in temperate regions, everywhere you go. I find that hilltops in tropical regions are much harder to find and discover the diversity on, and that's, I think, just because the forest is often so high above the hilltops that the insects are up in the canopy. But what happens with hilltopping is that if you imagine you're a small insect and you're not a herbivore, so imagine you're not tied to a specific plant, how on earth do you find each other? That's a problem. And so very often these insects, particularly things like parasitoids, like the tachinid flies we talked about, they will go to a hilltop, and all the males will go up there and they'll stake out specific spots. So there'll be one tree will have one species hovering above it. A rock will have another species sitting on it. There will be stems of a plant have another species on it. So all the species are going up there and they're partitioning the hilltop and living in different places on it, but it's all males. So you think of these hilltops as the red light districts of the fly world. And the females, if they can't find a mate, they head for that landmark, that hilltop. And if they find a mate on the way there, they don't finish going to the hilltop. They'll mate and that's it. So you can see this is an evolutionary stable strategy that works, that in years when they're more abundant, maybe the ones that go to the hilltops don't get many matings. In years when they're less abundant and fly numbers really change from year to year, species are really volatile, and it depends on very much the circumstances, whether they're common in one year or another. And in years where they're rare, most of the females will end up on the hilltop looking for males. And so, so this is a really important strategy, and a really, really understated conservation problem, right? Because what do we do with hilltops? We stick towers on almost all of them now, right? So, so we're really playing with fire, because these hilltops are critical for groups that are parasitoids, which control all the other insects in the environment, right? So, so really, really important. I really love studying insects on hilltops, because going to a hilltop gives you a really good overview of the species that are in an area, particularly the less common species. So now what I want to do is I want to go through the life histories quickly and try to talk about some of the life histories of these insects. We've already done some of this, right? So, so some of this will be a bit of review, but I want to go through all these different life histories. So we've got plant feeders, fungus feeders, debris eaters, or saprivores as they're called, predators, parasitoids, parasites. All of these ecologies are involved in the fly world, and many fly families will have only one strategy. There are a few fly families that do everything, though. One will be the group I study, Serpidae, the flower flies, and another are called the phorids, coffin flies. And we'll talk about both of those a little bit more. But they're very unusual because they do it all. But most families are very specialized. So, for example, the Tephrididae, the fruit flies, are all phytophagous. They're all plant feeders as larvae. And as a result, this group probably has more money thrown at it than any other group of flies. There are many, many serious pests in this group, and trying to keep them from spreading and keeping them under control is a big part of what we're trying to do with our agriculture. So the right-hand one here, Mediterranean fruit fly, is probably the largest pest in the world in terms of not size, but in terms of economic impact. They're fruit eaters. They feed on a couple hundred different species of fruits, and wherever they get established, they cause havoc. So whenever they arrive in Florida or California, there's a massive effort to try to wipe them out, because it will have huge repercussions on our fruit industry otherwise. The bottom left one is another huge pest worldwide, oriental fruit fly. Bactrocer, that genus in general, has a lot of serious pests in it. So anyways, lots of plant feeders, some of them huge pests. But there are lots of tephridids, lots of fruit flies that are not pests, but certainly the biggest ones that we hear about are in those groups. Drosophila, you'll sometimes hear them called fruit flies, but pumice flies is another word for them. These are the little tiny flies you'll see above your compost. If you've got a compost container and you leave the lid off, it seems like almost overnight, suddenly you'll have these little flies hovering over it. Okay, so these are Drosophila and relatives. And most of them are not pests. Most of them are decomposers. But this one, spotted winged Drosophila, got into Canada fairly recently, and look what it eats. Cherries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, peaches, nectarines, apricots, grapes, and others. This is a major pest that's having a significant impact on Canadian fruit growers. So you know, we do our best to try to keep these things from arriving and spreading, but with global trade, it's inevitable that some are going to get in, unfortunately. Fungus feeders, some of these are pests in mushroom farms, but by and large, these are just important parts of the forest ecosystem. There are certain families that are more typically fungus feeders than others. The platypesids are flat-footed flies I've shown here, 3 pictures of them. And then the bottom right are dryomysids. If you look, the middle fungus picture, the middle bottom, is a stinkhorn that we find commonly in our garden every year. And the top right and bottom right insects we see every year on the stinkhorn, feeding on it. And then in the case of the top right one, laying eggs in it as well and developing in it. So that's Melandromya, a specialized flat-footed fly. So we have lots of fungus feeders. So this term maybe you haven't heard before, saprovores. These are detritus feeders. They're feeding on anything that's rotting and decomposing. And so the top left one I think of as wing waggle flies, sepsids. You see these things waggling their wings and they're laying their eggs in rotting places. The bottom left, you'll have seen things like that. Almost certainly, almost everybody will have had encounters with those in bathrooms, humid places. The larvae live in the bends in our drains where there's a bit of compost builds up, and they feed in there, and you'll see the adults walking around on your mirrors and things sometimes. They're totally harmless, and in fact, they're doing us a favor cleaning out our pipes. So the others, micropizas in the top right, and this crazy fly in the bottom right, it's called a pentophthalmid, is one of the largest flies in the world, are both typically tropical, but we do have a few stilt-legged flies, the top right here in Canada as well. So soldier flies, many of these are saprovores as larvae, and I've thrown a couple examples in here in particular. Bottom and top, sorry, both left are the same species. These are compost flies. It's a fairly recent addition to our fauna in Ontario. They've been spreading north and increasing. I remember seeing the first ones, oh my goodness, back in the late 80s, early 90s in Southern Ontario and Southwestern Ontario. And now they're widespread into Central Ontario. So it's just marching north. They feed in compost heaps, and you see them commonly in your backyard. Harmless, helpful, but very, very common. And the bottom right is black soldier fly. And that species is now being used and cultivated everywhere because they're very, very good at breaking down waste from sewage to compost. And they produce such huge amounts of larvae that the larvae are now being used for food for animals as well. So you'll hear more about those over the years. We already talked about robber flies a bit. I just wanted to show them again here because for many, they're everyone's favorites. They're very conspicuous large predators. One of the flies that you tend to see when you go out for a walk in the woods, you'll see them perched on the end of twigs and on the ground. hunting other insects. So watch for those. And we're very, very lucky. We have a new field guide for these. It's just for Quebec and Ontario, but it at least is going to help us understand our fauna here in Canada a little bit better. And this has just come out. I got this copy ahead of time, but watch for this if you're interested in these fantastic animals. They're one of my favorite groups. I think you'd enjoy watching them as well. Some other predators, the scathophages or dung flies, you'll see their larvae are feeding in dung. They're ovipositing in dung, but the adults are predators feeding on other insects. And snail killer flies, the sciomyzids, are widespread around wetlands. You'll see them there, and they're laying eggs on snails in the wetlands, amongst other things. A lot of the flies as adults are not necessarily preying on other insects, like as in the case of robber flies, but many of their larvae are predators. So I've got a few examples here. The stiletto flies, the Midas flies, and the flower-loving flies all have larvae that live in the soil and are very predatory, chasing down and feeding on other arthropods in the soil. So fantastic group, much more diverse as you head further south. A lot of these are desert animals. So if you find yourself in Arizona or somewhere like that, you'll see a lot more of these than you will in Canada. But we've got a small but interesting diversity here as well. Another predatory group that you'll see in your yard, found across Canada, are cluster flies. These are all introduced. All 6 species are introduced, and as are their prey. Earthworms are introduced here as well. And along with the earthworms came their parasites. The Pollenia larvae came in with the earthworms. So we have 6 species here, and these lay larvae which then seek out the earthworms. So they're not actually laying the eggs on the earthworms, they're laying the eggs, or laying live larvae actually, which then pursue the earthworms and parasitize them. These are a couple neat ones, both also dry, arid land creatures. These are the worm lions. They make pits like ant lions. You may have seen ant lions before. They're another group. They're not flies at all, but there are flies that do this. It's the same effect. The larva is down in the bottom of the pit, and anything that falls in there, they'll attack it and feed on it. And there's an adult in the bottom left, and bottom right is I just threw that in as another Midas fly. An interesting example. This one's found in California, and it's on the endangered species list. And you may have heard this one has caused some strife for people that wanted to develop areas where this fly was found, because it's only found in a few places along the California coast in some dunes. Perhaps some of you have been to Australia or New Zealand and seen glowworms. In New Zealand, it's a tourist industry. You can go into caves to actually see the glowworms. It's quite a sight. Top left is the glowworms glowing. And so you go in without lights on, and the whole cave's lit up by these amazing bioluminescent things. But if you're in a place like Australia and you go for a walk in the wet forest at night, you'll sometimes see under an overhang or something, you'll see them there too. So they don't have to be in caves. There are species that are free living outside of caves as well. And the way it works, the bottom left here is a larva. The larva is up at the top. It spins these silken structures, which are sticky and have globules all along them. And if another insect flies into there, it gets trapped. It gets stuck, and they're predators. They feed on them. So the bioluminescence is to actually attract prey. Back to the tachinids again. So I want to talk about parasitoids now, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about them. The tachinids, as I already said, attack almost everything in terms of the insect world. They're laying eggs in or on other insects and developing and killing. The larvae is killing the host. And they're really, really diverse, many different types of tachinids. My colleague Jim O'Hara put together this sort of beautiful summary shot of all the tachinid variety, or some of the tachinid diversity. So some we haven't talked about though. Acrocerids, small-headed flies, crazy looking animals, bizarre. We don't have very many species in Canada, unfortunately. The one with the really long beak here is just amazing. It's a pollinator. Many of the acrocerids are pollinators, but these are spider parasitoids. They lay their eggs and their larvae hatch, and they seek out spiders. They crawl up the legs of the spiders, get into the book lungs, and then they'll often stay there and do nothing for years. So like tarantulas can live for many, many years, for example, and might be 12 years before these things suddenly decide to develop and they'll kill the host. But they don't just develop immediately necessarily. This is another group that's common in Canada, canopids or thick-headed flies. They're in my garden every year. I enjoy watching them. They're pollinators. You'll see them at the flowers, but also the females, you'll see them grabbing bees and wasps and laying an egg on them. So these are parasitoids of bees and wasps. The bottom right one is the only exception in the group, Stylogaster, and these are parasitoids of cockroaches and crickets and grasshoppers. And you'll see them often in the tropics. If you see a huge ant swarm, like an army ant swarm, they're catching other insects, and you'll see Stylogaster, these thick-headed flies, working along the front edge of the swarm, catching insects displaced by the ant swarm and laying eggs in them. So also pretty cool parasitoids. We already talked about the bee flies and their habit of dropping their little bombs into burrows and parasitizing wasps and bees. Really diverse, particularly in arid parts of the planet. So in Canada, the Okanagan Valley probably has one of the highest diversities of bee flies in the country. This is the group I cut my teeth on. I did my master's on big-headed flies at the University of Guelph way back in the early 90s. And I was interested in taxonomy of the group and have since, I don't know how many species. I guess I've described over 130 or 40 species of big-headed flies, maybe 150 species around the world. We just had a paper come out this month, actually, this month or last month, describing 100 new species from Australia. They're very, very similar as adults. We've got the one on the bottom left that looks very different, but the rest all look fairly similar. And often it's looking at male genitalia that tells them apart, that you can tell them apart by. So I spent a lot of my career looking at male genitalia of big-headed flies. These are parasitoids of leafhoppers, plant hoppers, and spittlebugs. So if you've seen that spit on plants, it looks like something spit there. There's an insect inside of that called a spittlebug, and the big-headed flies will attack that when it comes out of the spit, if it dares. Phoridae are another group of parasitoids, some of them, but this is a group that does everything. And we call them coffin flies because there are species that specialize on underground cadavers, and they'll go 6 feet under to find them. But this group, they do everything. So there are not just scavengers and detritivores, but there are also species that are parasitoids. So I got a couple good examples here that are kind of cool. The one in the top left is attacking an ant. That's called apocephalus. It's going to lay an egg on that ant. The larva is going to develop in the back of the neck and ultimately pop the head off as it emerges. So the genus of the fly is called Apocephalus, cephalus being head, apo being off. Zombie on the right is a phorid that attacks bees, and it changes their behavior, and they're active at night. They go to lights, and hence the name. And those phorids are in the bees. So pretty crazy. I wanted to show you enough examples here that you could relate to. So everyone knows June beetles, bottom left. They're in your gardens, your grass in particular, feeding on grass roots. There is a fly group, Pergotidae, that attacks them, the scarab pursuing flies, and specialize on parasitizing scarabs. So for every pest, there's something that attacks it. And for many things that aren't pests, the reason they're not pests is because there are things that attack them. This is one that many of you will be familiar with. We have forest tent caterpillars, top right, that attack our aspen and birch forest, aspen mostly forests. And there's a fly that responds to those outbreaks. And the first year, trees are defoliated by the caterpillar. The second year, the native flies, these friendly flesh flies, say that 3 times fast, will attack and totally suppress the population of tent caterpillars for like a decade. So this is a natural cycle. Both are native insects that occur. The bottom right is eastern tent caterpillar. They're the ones that have the actual tents. They're not attacked by these flies. The friendly flesh flies are very specific to forest tent caterpillars only. So In addition to parasitoids and parasites, we also have kleptoparasites, things that steal and parasitize prey of other things. So you'll often, these are fun to watch. These miltogramming or saddle flies will, they'll go after wasps, and the wasp will bring a paralyzed prey back to its burrow to lay an egg on, and the fly will dart in and lay a live larva on that prey item. And the first thing that larva will do will seek out the wasp egg and kill it. And then it will have that prey to itself and feed on that. So they're called satellite flies. Other kleptoparasites, you'll see them going when there's predatory bugs like assassin bugs. When they catch their prey, it's kind of a messy affair, and there's lots of body fluids leaking, and there are these flies called freeloader flies that will come and feed on those spilled fluids. So those are kleptoparasites in a way as well. Of course, parasites, everyone's familiar with parasites. Probably the most common one locally in Canada is the bottom left here. It's a type of blowfly, and they live in bird nests. So top left are a bunch of larvae from bird nests. You'll find these if you have a bluebird trail and you maintain the boxes, you'll see the larvae and the pupae in your boxes. More weird parasites, bottom right in Australia is Batrachomya. It's a species that's found in frogs. It's a specialized parasite there of frogs. And there are lots and lots of different bot flies. I'm not going to dwell on these. They're fantastic, very specialized. We're lucky we don't have human bot flies in Canada, but if you go to the tropics, you may encounter these little beasts. I've tried to get them to use me as a host, but I'm not a good host. They always die. So anyways, they're fairly harmless, but a little bit unpleasant, I'm told. So anyways, other parasites, of course, these are bird and bat parasites, the louse flies. And some of them, for example, the deercat on the right, there's another one called sheephead that's on sheep, was virtually wiped out, perhaps was wiped out in North America due to pesticide use. And now with more sheep being raised organically, they're back in small numbers, but they're fairly harmless, but you'll find them in some organically raised sheep herds. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about mosquitoes. If anyone wants to ask, I can do my best to answer questions. It's not my specialty, but of course, there are thousands of species of mosquitoes, many that bite people, many diseases that they vector, with some of them shown there. We're very lucky that black flies in Canada typically don't vector many diseases to humans, river blindness in Africa, but here, not so much. They're just really annoying. The larvae shown in the middle here are found in fast flowing water. So you'll find them wherever there are fast flowing streams, and they can be abundant by early May in the area that I live in. And everyone will find them coming out a little bit differently, depending on different timing, depending on where you live. So here are a few more examples of different biting flies. We talked about no-see-ums already. Corythrellas are kind of cool. They specialize on frogs and just bite frogs. Tsetse fly from Africa. Anyways, we've talked about some of these, so I won't dwell on them. I'm going to finish the talk by talking about pollinators. This is the area where I spend a lot of my research time. And there are many, many specialized pollinators like I'm showing here. There are specialized flies that only pollinate cocoa. The only way we get chocolate is from flies. There are specialized arum pollinators, orchid pollinators, you name it, even Rafflesia. This bottom right, these huge flowers found in places like Borneo. Blowflies are specialized pollinators of those. They smell like rotten meat. So lots of cool specializations. Flies with huge long proboscis to feed on tubular flowers. And so these are in Africa, these crazy nemestrinid tangle vein flies. But we have some here as well. So I wanted to just to very, very quickly tell you a little bit about pollination, because pollination has been all about honeybees for so long in the media. And of course, people studying honeybees have exploited this to get more funding. And you see signs like this: 1 out of every 3 bites of food you eat depends on a honeybee. But I could very easily market this: why study flies? Because 1 out of every 3 bites of food you eat depends on a fly. So in fact, flies are really, really important as pollinators. Indeed, within agroecosystems, honeybees are heavy lifters. Introduce plants, monoculture, introduce bee, it makes sense, right? It works well in that particular ecosystem, but not in native ecosystems. 23% in agricultural ecosystems is done by native bees, and 38%, as much as honeybees, is done by non-bees, mostly flies. So that's all in agricultural ecosystems. It changes when you're in a natural ecosystem, with honeybee being much less important. This is over $1 trillion annually to the global economy, of course, with pollination. So this is hugely important that we manage and understand these pollinators. And all we've studied historically are honeybees. So there's more and more research going on non-honeybee pollinators. Unfortunately, flies are getting some attention now as well. So these are the flies that I spent my career on. These are flower flies, also called hover flies. Almost all of them as adults are pollinators. They're very, very important, probably the most important group of flies as pollinators. So right up there with bees in terms of their importance. And how do you recognize them? They look like bees, right? A lot of them. And in fact, people have a huge problem recognizing them, as you can see when you see Facebook posts and media posts and things with the honeybee on the bottom left is a flower fly. That honey clearly is made by flies. I don't think so, but they've got a nice flower fly on the picture. This poor guy that wrote his tome on bees of the world, spent his whole career on it, and they stuck a stock image of a fly on the cover. That must have caused him to groan when he saw that for the first time. So how on earth do we recognize them if people have such a hard time recognizing what's a bee and what's a fly? So here's how you do it. If you want to recognize a flower fly, look closely at the wing and you'll see they have this spurious vein that ends in the middle of nowhere. But also look at the general gestalt of these animals. They have a different face shape than bees and wasps. They have shorter antennae typically, and generally the face is more rounded and different. So here we've got on the top two pictures are both wasps, yellow jacket on the left, bald face hornet on the right, and the mimics, the syrphids, the flower flies, are the other three. So these are perfect mimics, we call them. Perfect because they're very, very similar to their model. And that makes perfect sense, right? If you're going to mimic something, you'd think you want to be close to it. But there are lots of imperfect mimics out there in the fly world as well. In fact, there are more imperfect mimics than perfect mimics. And it turns out a grad student that worked with myself and Tom Sherratt, she found that probably this is driven by bird predation. Bigger flies have to be perfect mimics because they're so attractive as a meal for birds. Smaller ones, the birds will just go, be like, yeah, give it a miss. They don't look very carefully at them. So these don't have any exact model. They're sort of generalized bee or wasp-like flies. A lot of them have behavioral mimicry as well, where they wave their front legs. Because their antennae are short in flies, typically, they've adapted to this. Many of them have front legs that are black-tipped, and they wave them like antennae. So lots and lots of mimicry behaviors to separate that make them look like they're stinging counterparts. Of course, the flies don't sting, they're harmless, but the things they're mimicking are harmful potentially, and that's why they're mimicking them. So there are over 6,300 described species of flower flies, and in Canada, we have over 830 species. So it's like I said, a group that's very similar to birds in diversity. About a third of the species are really hugely important as larvae as well. The adults are all pollinators, so they're really important. But the larvae, remember, you have to think about the larvae. What do? Well, a third of them are predators of aphids and scales and other pests. So really, really important. Many of these are nocturnal, so you won't see them unless you really look carefully. Another big group, the larvae, are called rat-tailed maggots. They live in water, and they're really important in cleaning up water bodies. They're filter feeding out bacteria. And these examples here are found in sewage lagoons, where billions will be found in sewage lagoons, filter feeding and cleaning the water, those lagoons for us. We don't put them there. They come on their own. These are introduced species, these two examples I used here, but there are native species as well in the lagoons. And they're there by the billions. So if you want to learn more about these things, we do have a field guide now. This has been out since 2019, and we think that it's changed drastically accessibility to this group of insects. I think now people have the potential of learning flower flies the same that they would learn birds. The field guide covers this area, so sorry to those in the West. We're working on it, but we've only done the East so far. But what we have done, if you look at a page of the guide, is we've mapped out the distributions totally across the range for every species. So you'll see species, you'll know they occur in the West, which ones don't occur in the West, and at least it'll give you a bit of an idea of what's out there as well. So, so hopefully this is something you can use. Another resource is called iNaturalist. I highly recommend it. It's totally changed since the field guide came out. Before the field guide, there were only a few thousand records of flower flies or hoverflies, as they're called, in iNaturalist, and now there are over 1 million. And part of that is because of the field guide, and part is just a growing interest in people learning about the world around them. So if you're interested in insects, want to see more flies, how can you go about it? Well, you can go about it by planting native plants and encouraging things in your native gardens. So this is my garden, or our garden, that we have out in our front yard. And it's about 70 species of native plants. And we get a big diversity of insects in it, including lots of flies. So it's lots of fun. Nothing's a pest. And so it's just easy peasy to look after. No watering, no fertilizing, no pest control. It's all done naturally. If you don't have a garden or don't want to grow a native garden, you can still participate. There are some great right-of-way projects that Canadian Wildlife Federation is coordinating development of, where they're planting native plants in these right-of-ways to help create bigger corridors and connect places, wild places, and allow insect populations to thrive. Because as you've seen tonight, most insects are beneficial. There's only a few are pests. They give them all a bad name, but in fact, many are beneficial. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up, but I hope you've learned a few things along the way. It was a long and winding journey, but a fantastic group of animals with thousands of species. Thanks.
Gosh, thanks so much, Jeff. That was awesome. So much to learn, and you got me chuckling several times. And I saw from one of the comments that I was not alone in that. That was great information, great pictures. And I want to let everybody know Jeff is the person who authored a relatively new section on our website called Fabulous Flies, which I will have a link to in the follow-up email. And Jeff mentioned iNaturalist. He's wearing an iNaturalist t-shirt. I want to point out that this weekend, from Friday through to Monday, is what's called the City Nature Challenge. And I'll have a link for that as well that you're all welcome to participate in. It's kind of a fun activity that's gone on for, I'm not sure how many years now, not too many, but it's been growing in interest and popularity. So we can all get out across the country, note as many observations as we can, and it's kind of a fun, friendly competition. But I'll send links to that as well as the general iNaturalist pages. And okay, I guess it's time to go to questions. So someone's asking, why common milkweed plants get covered in flies in summer? Is it normal? What flies are they? Is it possible to reduce the number of them since I sit near these plants in the garden?
So you're talking about milkweed, sorry? Common milkweed?
Yeah, my common milkweed plants get covered in flies in the summertime.
So your milkweed plant's going to be covered in aphids as well. There's lots of native aphids that are attacking milkweeds. So the flies are there because when aphids feed, so not just aphids, but leafhoppers and other plant feeders, when they feed, they're having to consume a lot of liquid to get a little bit of sugar out of it, right? Think of maple syrup. How much do we have to boil off before we get the good stuff? So they're drinking in sap and peeing out water constantly and concentrating the sugars to feed on. But they're not super efficient, and so there's sugars that they're losing as well, and the sugars coat the plant. So often when you get aphid colonies, you'll get lots of sugars sticking all over the plant, and that attracts flies, which are feeding on the sugars. So is there anything you can do about it? Not really. Move your seat. Sorry.
I watch the show, I suppose, too. And just to say, I know some will have to sign off now, but thank you so much for your lovely comments and being here and your participation. It's greatly appreciated. So while you're saying thank you to us, I'm also going to say thank you to you. But it's another question from Claire. Are the stalks for the stalk-eyed flies flexible or rigid?
No, so they start out flexible and they become rigid. So in that Attenborough movie, you could see they were totally flexible as it was still soft. It's developing. So all flies, when they emerge from their pupa, are soft-bodied initially, and it takes a while for the cuticle to harden. But once the cuticles harden, it's hard. So those stalks are hard.
Okay. And Hillary's saying photography is excellent. What cameras do you recommend for macro photography?
Sure. So I want to point out that I used all iNaturalist photos for this. I had very few of my own photos in, and that's because my photo library is a bloody mess and I can't find anything. But iNaturalist is amazing. You can see most people allow their photos to be used in places like this. So it's a great resource. For photography, I use a 100 macro mostly. And the reason for that is it keeps me back from the subject enough that I don't scare it. So you could, like, if you use a shorter macro, like a 50 macro, for example, you have to be closer and tighter to the subject. Fine if it's an aphid that's not going to fly away. But for something that's flying, I find the 100 works for me. But I also have an amazing dedicated macro lens that I shoot Canon because of this one lens. And it goes up to 5:1, so you can do 5 times magnification. But for that, you need a flash, you need a tripod, and you need a non-mobile subject. So for my day-to-day photography, I'm using a 100 with or without a flash, depends on the circumstances. And the new mirrorless cameras are really, really good at locking onto focus for things that are moving. So it's getting easier and easier as the tech improves.
Great, thank you. How do the coffin flies find bodies at 6 feet deep? Do they rely on sense of smell or something else?
You got it, sense of smell.
Okay.
Yep, so there are certain chemicals that as soon as we die, those chemicals are produced. And so think of turkey vultures, okay? We all know turkey vultures soaring around. They have incredible, incredible olfaction. They have one of the best senses of smell of any birds. And they're not looking so much as they're smelling. And they're smelling for that putrefaction, which even if the death was just moments ago, they're starting to produce that odor that if things are tuned into it, they can find it.
Perfect, thanks. This next question, I think, might have been written before you touched upon some of your points at the end of the presentation. It's asking, what is the best thing we can do to help beneficial fly species in our gardens? But it's always great to sum up again, because there's...
No, I went over that quickly. I have a whole talk on just that, which is, it's a great question, but it's deep. You know, you can do a lot. So in terms of suggestions, so first, plant as much native as you can. It's a garden. Of course, you're going to have some non-native stuff probably because, you know, everybody does. I have a few non-natives. I put some Gaillardia in. I just like it. So whatever, it's a garden. But go with as much native as possible. Try to match the native species to your habitat, right? So I can grow swamp milkweed in my sand. I'm on sand out front. It will grow, but it's absolutely hammered by herbivores. There's all kinds of caterpillars and things that eat it because it's out of habitat. If I grow it in my wetland out back, it does really well and there's no herbivores on it hardly. So if you grow them in the wrong habitat, they're attacked more and they don't do as well and you'll be disappointed. So also for moisture, think about your soil moisture and stuff. So if it's a sand dwelling thing, like my garden is the best in a drought year. When everybody else has brown grass, I have this cacophony of color, right? It's amazing. But if I had a forested ecosystem, then I'd have to be planting very different things. So plant for your habitat. So research is involved. You need to do some reading to see what plants grow best in your area. iNaturalist is amazing at identifying plants. So you go out in the woods into the same habitat and look at what native plants there are that interest you, find them, either search for seeds yourself in the fall. Don't dig up the plants, but search for seeds or get the seeds online from a garden center that sells them. So those are my suggestions, but be careful what you're choosing. I've planted things that when I was a kid, I had a native garden at home and I put some things in it that my parents are still sad about today because they can't get rid of them. So you got to think a little bit about before, you know, for example, coltsfoot is a non-native, but it's a really important early spring nectar source. So I considered putting it in my garden, but then I read about it and it will break through your foundation if you put it near your house. So no.
I didn't know that about it. That's good to know. But I see now where I am that the willows are blooming and So that's a really good food source too. But what I will do is I will put a bunch of links in the follow-up email around that, because we have a lot of different handouts and blogs and tips that we can include for that specific question. Okay, and Ash is wondering, it's a neat question. For those who live in high-rise apartments, I've heard that bees and butterflies only go up a few floors. How high up would you expect to see fly pollinators?
Excellent question, and one that I
Mhm.
cannot answer. There are a few people that specialize in this realm. So there's, I think, York University, I'm pretty sure Lawrence Packer's lab, he had some students that specialized on green buildings and trying to figure out what plants grow and what pollinators visit them and stuff. And so their lab did a whole bunch of stuff. It was bee focused. Packer's a bee specialist, makes sense. But they would certainly have some data. There'd be data out there on it. I'd be speculating if I answered, and that would probably be misleading. So I won't even try.
And I often tell people, because this question does come up, and it would be really cool if people, if ever they observe things, to share it. And whether you can share it on iNaturalist or, email me, it's neat to discover this stuff.
Yeah, you know
Okay,
what?
so
If I can just run with that a little bit, that's a really important
yeah.
Sarah. So there is so much unknown with insects that everybody here can contribute to science and find new things about insects. So just give you an example. Last year, my son and I were birding down at Peely in the fall, 2 years ago, last year. Anyways, there was a migration along the lakeshore of insects. So we went to the lakeshore to look for migrating birds, but there was a massive migration of insects going on. And so we sat down and he took pictures and we counted and we documented it. And we're going to publish a little paper on it. But it turns out it's the first time that one flower fly, Halophilus fasciatus, narrow-headed marsh fly. Sorry, I don't even know. I made the common names, but I can't remember them. Anyways, narrow-headed marsh fly had never been recorded migrating, and we saw thousands that day. So little observations like that, or observations on a rooftop garden, for example, of what pollinators are there, putting them on iNaturalist with notes about how high and stuff. Like all that could be really, really valuable.
Absolutely. Good. I'm glad you mentioned that and elaborated on that. Okay, so someone's saying, please give the name of your new field guide for flower flies. I missed it on the screen. Oh, and then we will have a link, and I will have it in the email too. But
Sure. So field guide to the flower flies of northeastern North America. And they don't all say working copy on them.
Perfect. Okay, just two more questions. So Maria's asking, what is the difference between parasitoid and parasites? That's a good question. I was going to actually ask, because even though I've been told, I don't remember. So I want you to please remind me. Remind all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. So parasitoids kill their prey, and parasites typically do not kill their prey. So if you have lice, they're uncomfortable, but they don't kill you. If you have a parasitoid in an insect, it's typically going to kill the host. So if a parasite ends up on the wrong host, it can have deleterious effects, though. So, for example, bot flies are parasites. They don't destroy their host. So there's a Cuterebra, is a big bot fly that lives in chipmunks. You'll see chipmunks that have a distended groin in the summertime. It's a bot fly larva in there. Looks uncomfortable, but it doesn't affect the chipmunk's day-to-day operations. And it has antibiotics that keep the wound from getting infected, and it doesn't hurt. Apparently, it's uncomfortable when they turn, but if they don't turn, apparently it's not uncomfortable. I want to experience this, but I haven't had a human bot fly in me. Anyways, so anyways, where was I going with this? Good Lord. Oh, so occasionally a bot fly will get in the wrong host, and that can be bad. So if a bot fly gets in the wrong host, for example, a species that travels up the spine to live along the back on a deer or something like that, if it's in the wrong host, it might go through some serious organs or something like that. So occasionally parasites can be a problem, but typically parasites are non-fatal. Parasitoids are fatal. That's why we have some great movie like Aliens, right? Is a human parasitoid.
Mm-hmm. thank you for that comparison or example. So I think I'm seeing some questions going in the chat, but if you could please just pop them into the Q&A, then it's just easy to have them in one spot. We are going to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I see 2 more questions here, so we'll see if any more come into the Q&A after that, but we'll wrap up soon. Can the cluster flies be used to control jumping worms?
Jumping worms? I don't know what jumping worms are. There's a problem with common names.
It's a new kind of worm that we've been hearing about that have sort of come into the country, and I don't know too much about it, but they have been spotted, I think, in some parts of Ontario.
So I don't know if jumping worms are in the earthworm family or if there's something it's like there's so many things called fly that aren't flies, right? Mayflies, etc. So I don't know if these things are true worms or not. I'd have to read up on it. I haven't heard about them. But if they're earthworms, yes, cluster flies probably attack them, but we'll see. Okay.
Last question. Will insects ever disappear, in your opinion?
So it's actually a good question. It's subtle. So there are insects that are endangered. There are insects that are extinct. There are insects that are going extinct, are going to become extinct. Insects overall, will they ever disappear? Not unless the planet blows into a million pieces. I mean, even if we cease to exist on the planet as a species, insects will persist for sure. But in terms of day-to-day, there are, not all insects are abundant. There are many, many insects that live at sort of low numbers in the environment, and anything, that changes could affect whether or not that insect lives or dies or goes extinct. So particularly in the tropics, there are a lot of very specialized, very, very small range species that we're very concerned about. We just did a paper, John Klimko and some colleagues and I did a paper reviewing flower flies and their status in Canada, Eastern Canada and the northeastern US. And we found that there were very few species that were threatened, which was a surprise, because in Europe, there are a lot of flower flies that are threatened, but our forests are in better shape. So in Europe, we've been there longer, and the logging and the effects of habitat disruption have been more significant. And so a lot of the species of flower flies that live in old growth have disappeared in Europe and are now endangered. Whereas here, those things seem to be doing pretty well still. So it just depends on what you look at and where.
Okay. I see there are 2 more questions. We're going to just share those and then we're going to wrap it up. So
sure.
Can you comment on those weird orange ladybugs that have invaded Canada? Are they insects or flies?
They're insects, not flies. So yeah, I guess I should have done a step back at the beginning. So insects, all 6-legged animals, right? Flies are one order of insects. Beetles are an order. So these are big groups of insects, right? Beetles, flies, mayflies, true bugs, etc. So the orange beetles you're talking about, they're Asian lady beetle, Harmonia axyridis, and they're introduced into Louisiana for biological control because they eat aphids. But they eat a lot of things. They're generalist predators. Introducing a generalist predator is a bad idea. So that was a very, very short-sighted introduction, and they spread very quickly from Louisiana, and they're now throughout North America. They've had huge impact on native lady beetles. So this pertains to our last question. Some of the lady beetles may have gone extinct because of this introduced pest. Is it a pest? I don't know whether to call it a pest. It's an invasive species. So in that sense, it's a pest, but they do some good. They eat a lot of aphids along with other things, but they have displaced native fauna for sure.
Okay. And then the last question I'm going to ask tonight is, what's your favorite flower in the Maritimes and why? Do you have a favorite flower?
Flower?
Flower fly in the Maritimes.
Flower fly in the Maritimes. Oh, I don't know if there's any that are my particular favorites. I mean, I really love the perfect mimics. A lot of the perfect mimics are really great. Most of those are late summer species. So Spilomaya, oh God, what did I call the common name for Spilomaya? I don't even know. 132. So these are the ones that I had on the perfect mimics slide, and they're just fantastic. Hornet flies. Anyways, they're amazing. You see them on flowers. So I think my single favorite one of those is probably Eastern hornet fly, which is gets barely into the Maritimes. It's a little bit more southern, but it's a spectacular species, yellow and black.
Cool. Thank you. Well, thank you for all of this. This has been really, really great to talk about something that is not commonly talked about, known about, and you're actually, helping all of us expand our horizons and super. A lot of people have stayed on for all of this Q&A. So thank you guys so much. Everyone who's been on, those who've stayed on, the stragglers, all your wonderful commentary. So I wish you all a wonderful rest of the evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. It's 8:20, I think, here. And again, there will be a follow-up email coming out soon, as soon as I get it ready, maybe Friday. Watch out for Friday evening, possibly Saturday. But also look up the City Nature Challenge if you're eager to get ready, doing that before the email comes out to you, so you can sign up for your area if you wish. But thank you, Jeff, so much. This has been fantastic. Lots of great learning going on and a lot of humor too. So thank you.
Thank you so much for all the great questions too, everyone. I loved it.
Great, great. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.